the folks that are joining us on this session, the second session of the art of the possible in action, turning data into decisions. My name is Kevin Mulhall. I am a senior technical program manager here at TechSoup for the Microsoft partnership. And we are very pleased to be joined by the fantastic team from Tech Impact, Ryan, Dharneesh, and Matt, who are going to be presenting today on some of the amazing capabilities that you will find in Microsoft, particularly Microsoft Azure and its many services that are nested within the platform. If you can go ahead and go to the next slide, just some general housekeeping. This session, again, is being recorded. You can, there's a little, the second bullet, we can kind of misnumber that. Video has been disabled for this, but microphones have not. But we kindly ask, of course, that people be on mute during this session for the sake of the recording. As much as we thoroughly enjoy hearing from everybody, we're going to try and hold that off to the Q&A portion of the session. There is two options here in terms of communicating either via chat or we have Q&A. So general commentary, of course, you can throw that into the chat. You can also throw it into the Q&A, but it makes a little bit more sense to use the dedicated Q&A area. If you want to use chat just to make things simple, we kindly ask that any questions that you have going into chat, if you could just start them with the letter Q, doesn't need to be necessarily capitalized or in quotes, but just kind of lead it with that, just because if a bunch of stuff starts flowing in, it's a little bit easier to isolate those questions. Again, during the session, we're going to keep attendees on mute. When we get to Q&A, there's a raise hand option to speak. We could certainly use that. If there's not a ton of questions and you just feel like coming off of mute, please, by all means, we do love hearing your voices and the comments. Display names may be presented during the recording, as with any type of session. So just, of course, be mindful of that. And then after the live session, there is a survey that you will be receiving. Pretty please with sugar on top. Provide your feedback. We do these sessions for a lot of different reasons, but we really want to be able to capture the experience that you all have when you're attending these sessions, where we're constantly working to make the content relevant, timely, and things that it can even kind of oversold, but even transformative. We really do believe that technology has the capability to do that. And when it's in the hands of people like yourselves, honestly, the sky's the limit. With that, gonna be muting. Okay. Again, if you could please keep yourself on mute during the session, it'd be greatly appreciated. With that, that's some of the general housekeeping. Can you go to the next slide?
Cool.
Okay. So with that, again, I'm going to kick it over to the team at Tech Impact. Again, we'll be keeping an eye on chat. Questions can go into there or to the Q&A, and take it away, guys.
Cool. Thanks so much, Kevin. Can't believe this is the last of these that we're doing, 6 down. Very exciting to be here with you all. I'm hoping that a bunch of you were here with us during our last one before the Thanksgiving holiday in the US back on November 20th. And if you weren't, and this is your first one joining, just to give a brief introduction of our team, Tech Impact is a national nonprofit focused on helping other nonprofits use technology to improve how they do their work. We do that in a few different ways. We do that with all kinds of tech services. We help on the managed services side, and then certainly on our end, helping teams think about more advanced technology and data type of work. We do a lot of educational resources and webinars, so great chance to take a look there. And then we also do our fair share of workforce development programs ourselves. We're actually just about to graduate our 1,600th person from our own workforce development programs, focus on getting people a job in tech. Just to briefly introduce our team, we'll do this really fast. On the case that you were here, my name's Ryan Harrington. I lead our data lab team at Tech Impact, so we are focused entirely on helping nonprofits use data effectively. Are you collecting data the right way? Are you thinking about storage for it, reporting for it, advanced analytics, generative AI? We will, of course, be spending today focused a lot more on some of those basic building blocks of how do you make sure that your house is in order. I'll pass it to Dharneesh and Matt really quickly to just a very brief introduction of themselves, and then we'll get into content. Dharneesh? Dharneesh is definitely here. I saw him. Matt, why don't you introduce yourselves and then
Sure.
we'll
Yeah,
get
I could
going.
jump in. My name is Matt St. Cyr. I'm the application developer at Tech Impact. I've been here about 2 years. I do all things CRM and application data and everything in between.
Awesome. And Dharneesh, there you are. Go ahead. Oh, you know what's happening? Your sound is not coming through. So we're going to keep moving, and you have like 30 minutes to solve that until you're up. So we'll get going from there. But anyway, Dharneesh leads our data engineering team, and I promise his microphone was working earlier today because I was with him on a call and it worked. But we will keep ourselves moving. All right, so today, we are building upon the work that we talked about last time, which was focused more on what's possible in the first place. So in order to really have a cohesive and thoughtful data strategy, you need to know what your end goal looks like, what's possible for you to accomplish. And we talked about the stack of advanced analytics and some AI opportunities, agents and RAG and AI search and all those really exciting kinds of things. But now you have to take a step back in order to enable any of that work, in order to make the possible possible, to make the art possible. You have to have an understanding of what a data lifecycle looks like and some of the technology and governance that is ultimately going to allow you to enable it. In a lot of ways, this is like the unsexy stuff, but it's the most important thing. You cannot build the rest of the work that you want to do. You cannot implement the really exciting data products that you want to without getting your house in order around what your data looks like. And so I think this is maybe the most important topic that we could possibly be talking about. And no matter where you are in maturity as a nonprofit, there is always additional data governance and data quality and data storage improvements that you can be making. So there's a lot to learn here, a lot to dig in on. Throughout the course of the day, we're going to certainly highlight some Microsoft technologies that help with this, but there's always more technologies, particularly even in the Microsoft stack, that can really help you succeed here. So if when we go through and talk about some of these technologies, you're like, that feels really advanced for where I feel like I am, that's okay. There is another solution for you that's right size for your organization. The more important thing to think about are the ultimate goals of how to be successful in these things. And the technology component is really an enabler of that. So all of this fits inside of a data strategy. Last time around, we spent the last portion of the conversation talking about what are the building blocks of making a good data strategy. Like we said, it starts with defining those goals. That's why we started with what's possible. But then a lot of the rest of this is really about the governance side of it. We are strong believers in data audits here as a way to get an understanding of what your current state looks like and how your future state should look. And then from there, figuring out tools for the job, implementation plans, the skills on your team, and building a continuous evaluation cycle for that are really, really important. So just as a reminder, this is how we think about building a data strategy. We're not going to talk about it too much today, other than to reference some of these key areas, particularly around the auditing of your data and the right tools for the job. All of this, though, all of your data work fits inside of something called a data lifecycle. We also teased this a little bit last time. The data lifecycle is a pretty straightforward process. It starts with getting an understanding of the data that you're generating. So how are you bringing that data into existence in the first place? From there, you have to get a sense of where that data is going to be stored so that it can be put in a useful format for other people to use it. And in order to do that, you use a process called extract, transform, and load. And we're going to talk a lot more about each of these steps later. And then the last piece is getting to the analytics component. And that's really what we talked about last time. As a quick reminder, some of the technologies we talked about were Azure AI Foundry. That's how we demonstrated the AI search components and some agentic AI components as well. And that's a little bit more of an advanced tool for folks who are looking to take their AI capabilities just a little bit further. And then we also demonstrated Microsoft Fabric, which unifies both the storage and analytics components into one environment. We highlighted the analytics side last week. We're going to talk a lot more about the storage, the extraction, transforming, and loading steps today. The other technologies that we mentioned last week, but we didn't actually talk about, we're going to talk about today. So those are Microsoft Synapse, which is another tool that provides some similar functionality to Fabric, but at a different level of granularity and capability. So there's some trade-offs between those tools and why one might be more important for your organization to use versus the other. And we'll talk through some of that decision space. And the other one that we didn't talk through very much was a tool called Microsoft Purview. And Microsoft Purview is a tool that helps with governance across your entire data lifecycle so that you can have an understanding of where data is at any time and some of the best practices around that. So we'll also be spending time talking about that as well. In order to talk through those things, we're going to dive into each step of the data lifecycle. So we're going to go through one by one to each of these components and talk through some of the things that your organization should be thinking about as it relates to that particular step. There are some best practices in here that you could bring back to your organization. Like I said, regardless of where you're at from a data maturity or a technology perspective, these best practices are really what matters. And that's going to look different from an implementation perspective for all of you, but could certainly be powered by some of these tools. And we're going to start at the best place to start, the beginning, with data generation. Data generation is exactly what it sounds like, what I mentioned before. The whole goal in the data generation step is to figure out how to best collect data accurately, consistently, and in a timely fashion. And those key components, we're going to talk more about data governance later, are some of the most important pieces of your data stack. I spend a lot of my life talking about the phrase garbage in, garbage out. Any data work that you do is functionally the ultimate reflection of that concept, garbage in, garbage out. If you're starting your data process with inaccurate, inconsistent data that doesn't come in a timely fashion, you're not going to be able to build trust in the output for your data. You're going to be making decisions that are poor. You're going to be harming your constituencies in some way. Ultimately, it doesn't let you make the decisions that you need to be making. In general, and this is something for you to potentially reflect about, is thinking through, we're not seeing the slides. Is that just Joanne that's having that problem, or are other people also not seeing the slides? Because that feels really important. We are able to see the slides. Okay, Bailey can see it. Cool. Thank you, folks. Joanne, I hope we can get that resolved for you, but that was important to pause for a second. Okay, so if you're thinking about your own organization from this perspective, a major pain point that people tend to have is that a lot of their data comes in through manual data entry, and that's okay. There are a lot of places where you have to have manual data entry, intake forms for new patients, or people volunteering and signing in. To some level, that's going to always be true. But as much as possible, you should be pushing towards validated, automated data collection that reduces the likelihood for human error. We're going to talk some more about best practices for that a little bit later on, but this is what you should be thinking about. Last week, we introduced this idea as an example of an organization that wanted to try to predict their donor churn. For those of you who were here last time, or even if you weren't, this is a great example of a more advanced analytics topic, predictive analytics. This is specifically a classification model. And in order to build this, we needed a few different data sources. We needed the past donation history for the individuals. We needed event attendance record. We needed engagement with emails, and we needed income data. And there could be more or less data sources that you'd use in a real life scenario, but this is a good starting point just from an example perspective. The value of this, if I could go predict whether or not someone's likely to donate again, well, if the answer is yes, that they're likely to donate again, then I probably don't need to deploy a lot of resources, the valuable time of my staff, or how we're thinking about engagement emails with them. Instead, I could go target the people who are less likely to donate again to see if we could provide an intervention and change what their behavior looks like, and ultimately increase the number of donors that we're going to get. Our goal is to impact change. Well, each of those 4 data points comes from a different place. They're all being generated from a different area. So for example, that past donation history information, perhaps you're using a tool like Salesforce for that. or one of the other many donor management systems that exist. Your event attendance, you're using Microsoft Forms. So for every single event that people are going to, you have a form, or maybe you have a generic form that people are using to sign in, so you can track that appropriately. You're using HubSpot to help you manage engagement with your emails. And so for every single email you send out, you have the list of emails associated, and you know the status of how people are engaging with them. And then perhaps you go ahead and you augment your donor data and you go pull in income data and some other demographic data about folks, and you also store that in Salesforce. Well, all of those different data sources live in different systems. And so the big question that you have to think about after you generate it is, how do I actually get them all in the same place? Something we hear a lot is that a lot of people's data, a lot of organizations' data is siloed from each other. They don't talk to each other. That might be something that you feel in your own organization as well. That can be really, really challenging. And that's the value of this step 2 in the data lifecycle that we're talking about. It's both extracting, transforming, and loading. And then it's also storage for the data. We have to extract, transform, and load the data to get it into the right format in the right place. And storage is another big consideration here. And we're going to start with that. When I'm thinking about my goals for data storage as an organization, one of the things I'm really thinking a lot about is that I want to have a centralized system that's going to make my data as accessible as possible and as secure as possible. This is less and less true today, but going back a decade ago, a lot of organizations were using on-premises, like local file storage for their work. More and more people have moved to cloud-based storage platforms. So that means you're using tools like SharePoint or OneDrive, and all of your data tends to live in those places. The next level of maturity up that you should be thinking about, though, is how do I take it off of those productivity platforms and move particularly some of my more sensitive or important data into something more secure and more structured. And those would be cloud-based storage infrastructure. There's a bunch of common pain points that would point you in the direction of this is something that our team should be considering for ourselves if you're not already doing it. I'm going to highlight 3, but then I've got a whole bunch more that I'll just briefly talk through from there. One that we see happen a lot is if you start to run into the issue of like you have an important data set, whatever it might be, donor data, impact data, program data, whatever, and all of that gets stuck on one person's computer. It lives in their OneDrive somewhere, so it might not be their literal local machine, but it could just be on their OneDrive. It's somewhat inaccessible. It's difficult to go find, and maybe that person just went on vacation or something else happened, and all of a sudden other people don't have access to this. That's a pretty sure sign that you should be thinking about other solutions for your data storage and how you're thinking about governance of your data more broadly than that. Another one that causes me physical pain sometimes is the email attachment chaos. I imagine a lot of you have run into this before. You have your impact data or your donor data, and many people have their fingers on it, and it just goes back and forth in email attachments. Report V1 updated, report really final this time, number 3. There's normally someone's initials on it, maybe a date somewhere, and keeping track of which one is which can be really challenging. And so the versioning of your data becomes difficult and makes it so that no one's really sure what a single source of truth looks like. Or perhaps you're in the situation where like you're investing in reports and you're investing in dashboards and you're working on automating those things. But the reality is that you have a ton of manual steps that you have to go figure out. And so it just takes a lot of time and effort to make those things happen on a weekly or monthly basis. That would be a lot better used for other things. Something that you might run into are some of these other common pain points, some of which I talked about. A big one that we talk about a lot here is that there's just no single source of truth. And what that really means in practice is that there should be a very clear, this is the data. This is what our holy grail is. This is the data that we care about. And if you can't identify that, then you're probably going to get yourself in trouble. Data silos are those ideas that across systems or across teams, your data is not talking to each other. So you can't answer some more advanced questions that would require understanding how those systems interact together. You might not have a sense, going back to the Excel example, of which version of data is the right version. It's related to that idea of single source of truth. Your data accessibility could be poor. You don't always have the right people with access to the right tools. And that could also mean that too many people have access to data that they shouldn't have access to, but you don't have the appropriate controls there. You could have issues with data lineage. So knowing how data was changed over time to go from the raw data to your final report so that you can feel confident in what you're saying to your constituency. You could have poor performance. Have any of you ever pushed an Excel document too far and all of a sudden it takes like 10 minutes to get anything done? That happens less and less. Microsoft's made a lot of improvements there, particularly as it's gone to cloud-based. But either way, like that's a sure sign that you shouldn't be using a tool like Excel anymore, that you really need a database to help you with that. You could have governance issues. Your data could be inconsistent, that single source of truth idea. Maybe you're an organization that's growing and your current infrastructure is just not going to let you do that. Or you don't have automation in place that's going to help you thrive in your work either. Those are all really common pain points, some of which I'm guessing are resonating with some of you as we're talking about them, that you might want to think about. So I'd be curious. I have a quick Slido poll up here. I'm going to give you all a couple seconds. If you go ahead and join the poll, actually, let's just check something here. Go ahead and join the poll. You can go to slido.com and enter in that number at the bottom, 2377169. Or you can use the QR code that's listed. Take a couple of seconds just to go ahead and do that. And I'd be curious about which of these pain points resonate with you. You can pick as many of them as you want to, so select all that apply. And I'm curious, which are the big pain points for your organization right now? Kevin is super helpful and dropped that into the chat. So you've got the slido.com and you've got the number for the poll to go join it. So just take a minute, get yourself over there, and I'd be curious about what is most applicable to your organization. And we'll talk through what we're seeing in a second. Great. Love seeing a bunch of you joining. That's super helpful. So just take a moment and fill it out. I'll reveal it in about 30 seconds, just after a few more folks have had the chance to go fill it out. Really appreciate seeing that. So, all right, so let's go ahead and reveal this. All right, and my favorite thing about these is you can see it start to changing. So the number one thing that's starting to pop up is just a lack of automation in your organization. Data silos are really important as well, and some data consistency. But the reality is, like, a lot of you are all feeling some of these. Not surprising that lack of scalability and poor performance are some of the issues that are less important to folks here, but that's something that in the future could be really problematic. But automation, really important, really helps reduce mistakes. Data silos helps you see patterns across teams that you couldn't before if you can solve for that. And data inconsistency is that kind of ultimate reflection of garbage in, garbage out. If you can solve that inconsistency, that quality set of issues, you're much more likely to have strong metrics on the back end. So really, really interesting to see what this looks like. And that's common for what we see for nonprofits all over, but really, really helpful. So if those are some of the pain points we were talking about that you're feeling, that's probably a good sign for you that it's time to shift from thinking about just using a tool like SharePoint to using something that's on the cloud. I guess they're technically both on the cloud, but something on one of the infrastructure platforms like Microsoft Azure. SharePoint is wonderful. We use it. It has its place. And if it is the main storage for your data, that's probably not the best place for it to be utilized. And Azure is something a little bit better. Azure, the cloud, is really valuable for a whole bunch of reasons. You've probably heard some of these before, but it's just worth reiterating some of them. Number one, like being on the cloud is typically very reliable. Now I say this as we've had a couple major outages on the internet in the last couple of weeks with the Cloudflare outage, and there was an AWS outage, but not an Azure outage. But in general, there are teams of engineers, and this is what makes all of this work, who are trying to solve these problems instead of you needing to solve these problems for your own organization. So it's letting you focus on your mission as opposed to focusing on making your data more reliable. Similarly, it helps with scale. You don't have to worry about your resources as your data grows. Just naturally, the amount of storage that you take up, the resources you take up will grow with you in a pretty easy and linear type of way, predictable type of way. It's much more maintainable for the same types of reasons. You don't have to have the engineers to help make it maintainable for you. Someone else is handling that. Now, you would need someone with some expertise in some of these systems, whether or not that's a person on your team or a partner that you're working with to make that happen. But still, it's taking some of that headache from you. And last, it's a bit more secure for the same type of reason. There are teams, thousands of engineers working on this to make sure that your security posture is appropriate. You still have to click the right buttons, but ultimately, it's much easier for you. And then another really important thing to consider, this is particularly true for Azure, is that there are nonprofit credits available. There are $2,000 of nonprofit credits available that you're able to leverage. And we found that that covers a lot of the expenses for most nonprofits that we're working with. You have to reapply for that every year, but it's a really valuable thing to have in your back pocket. Now, a question that you have to go figure out for yourself is what type of data that you have. Because the type of data you have and the type of data you're storing is going to impact how you want to structure your data on the cloud inside of Azure. At a high level, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but there's these two major types of data to think about. There is structured data and unstructured data. Structured data is just simply data that's in a tabular format. So how you think about structuring a CSV or an Excel file or something similar to that. That's the data that I think most of us tend to think of on a day-to-day basis, and particularly where you're going to see a lot of value in these tools. Unstructured data is going to be kind of everything else. It's PDF files, it's pictures and images, it's videos, it's emails, it's other types of text. It's kind of all the other stuff that you might need in order to operate your world. And some organizations have a lot of unstructured data that they need to handle. Some have a lot of structured data. Some are in the middle. And so the type of system that you use, once again, you don't need to worry too much about these details, but I think it's helpful to just get the verbiage, the language for you, is going to depend upon what you need. You might have heard phrases like data warehouse or data lake or data lakehouse before. I swear there was a period of time where there was always a new infrastructure being set up and felt like it was data with another body of water associated with it. But these three are great to know about in particular. A data warehouse is perfect if you primarily have a lot of structured data, a lot of tables, a lot of like log files, things along those lines. It's a place to land that structured, cleaned, analytics-ready data so that you can use it downstream to support the analytics, the dashboarding, or the AI that you want to do with it. Data lakes are a little bit of a better solution if you have pretty raw, diverse data. So you're kind of landing it there first. That's going to be really helpful if you have unstructured data, images, or videos, or PDF files, or all of those kinds of things that your organization needs to use. And lake houses marry a bit of those two. And there's trade-offs, of course, that you don't have to worry about too much now across all these different things. We introduced Microsoft Fabric last week, and we're going to talk about it a bit more in a few minutes. Microsoft Fabric has data warehousing and data lake housing as the two options that you might use for your data infrastructure there. And so that might be something that would be really valuable for you to consider and figure out how to migrate your data from the hot mess that might be your SharePoint into something that's a bit more structured inside of Azure using a tool like Fabric to help you with that. So that's the storage component. So knowing the right storage for the job makes a really big difference for your work. Let's advance a little bit in the data lifecycle and talk a bit more about the extract, transform, and load process. A lot of times, if you're talking to a person with a data background, a data engineer or a data scientist, or whoever else it might be, instead of them saying extract, transform, load, you're going to much more frequently just hear them say ETL or sometimes ELT. There's a minute difference between those that we don't have to worry about too much today. That's the language that you're looking out for. Like I said, this is really the process of how do we get data from one place where it was generated to another place where we want to store it. And it's really important for those reasons. So let's go back to thinking about that donor churn concept we were talking about. We mentioned that data is coming from multiple different places: Salesforce, Microsoft Forms, HubSpot, and Salesforce again. And we want that to be in one unified storage location so that we're able to use it to build this predictive analytics model. Um, I would recommend in this case, we're probably going to build a data warehouse to go support this because it's all structured data. All the data coming out of these places is all tabular. But now the question is, how do I actually get the data into that data warehouse so we can go make this prediction? Well, in order to do that, I need to walk through this process. So from the source of my data, I extract it, we transform it probably inside of Azure, and then we load it into whatever our storage solution is. There's some key questions that I think about at each one of these steps that's going to impact the decisions that I make. So first, on the extraction step, some things I might think about are just table stakes. What are the data sources in the first place? I might ask questions about how frequently does the data change? So sometimes data changes constantly. We get new donors in at any time, but I might only need to get that information refreshed on a daily basis. If it doesn't need to be the most up to date possible. Sometimes data only refreshes once a year. Maybe when we're thinking about our income data, for example, we don't always update that. We do one big push every December to go get the current donor information. And so I don't have to worry about that too much. Or maybe I'm pulling in external data, like data from the US Census or whatever your country's version of that might be. But knowing that really changes how I would set up this infrastructure. I need to get an understanding of how the data is structured. It's probably tabular. It might not be. But how is it? Is it long data? So lots and lots and lots of records, but only a few columns? Or is it wide data, which is kind of the opposite? Only a few records, but a lot of columns about it. Do I have a way to connect the data? So if I have those different data sources from Salesforce and Microsoft Forms and HubSpot, how do I know that John Doe is the same person in each one of those different systems so that I can connect the dots? Is that something that I have to go solve for? And how do I get the data out of there? That is going to be very dependent upon the individual source. They're all going to have something different that you have to go worry about. Some have an API, some you have to download, some make it really difficult and you have to get a little creative. If I go compare that to our donor churn problem here, so we talked about this a little bit. Most of these are things I would want to extract daily. So you would want to set up a routine to go pull the data out of Salesforce into your data warehouse once a day, or from Microsoft Forms into your warehouse once a day, or from your emails once a day. But that income data is only yearly, and so we might make a different choice about how to structure that. The data is going to come out in different types of ways. If you're not familiar with JSON, it's just another common way that data is shared, which I always forget what that stands for, but it's very common for developers to utilize to share data back and forth across systems. CSV is something that you might be more familiar with, comma-separated values. It's like Excel's more machine-readable cousin that you would use pretty frequently. Well, each of those would have a different way to get data out that we have to deal with. I connect with them in different ways as well. So most of these have an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. And if you're not familiar with that term, it's really just how two different systems on the internet could possibly talk to each other. And there's typically some really strong documentation about how those APIs work so that a developer or an engineer could go connect them appropriately. But something like Microsoft Forms doesn't have an API that I'm using. And so instead, I just need to pull it from Forms directly, and I need to build some kind of integration to make that happen. And that means that the way I extract it could be different. Data Factory is a tool inside of Azure that I could use to make this happen. Whereas the event attendants, maybe I need to write a script to make that happen for me instead. And I should caveat all of this to say that this is entirely made up. I have not entirely double checked this, but just for illustrative purposes, so you get an understanding of the type of decisions you might need to make. When I transform the data, there's a whole other set of issues that I have to deal with. One thing is that I start to deal with the challenges around how clean my data actually is. So I might have things like outliers. So let's talk about donor data. Maybe most of my donors are, have a net worth around $500,000 to $2 million. But I have one donor in there that is $1 billion. Well, I'd want to go double check and make sure, like, is that a real number? Did someone have a fat finger issue there? How do I handle an issue like that? Or maybe it is a real value, but I need to have something set up so that I'm checking those types of things. What about missing data? Sometimes a missing value is okay. It just means that someone hasn't done something. Other times a missing value isn't okay. How do I handle those issues? Do I feel really confident about how validated the data is in the first place? And that goes to some best practices that we can use on generation. Do I need to aggregate the data? How do I need to aggregate the data? Maybe I need to go calculate means or sums or something a little bit more exotic than that. Is there external data that I have to go bring in to augment this? I mentioned earlier US Census data. That's something that our team uses to augment data sources pretty frequently. How should I do that? How's the use for that? Or maybe it's other types of data that would be valuable beyond that. And I mentioned earlier that part of transforming data is understanding how the different data sets I'm working with should be joined or merged or unioned together. And that means that I need to know what is the key value. How do I know that John Doe is John Doe is John Doe in each one of the systems that I'm working with? Or can I know that? Or do I have to build in some fuzzy logic to help me figure that out? All of those are some great questions that I need to figure out how to answer for myself and solve for as part of that transformation process. And the last piece is loading. We somewhat answered these questions when we thought about storage because we want to think about those ahead of time. But where am I literally going to land this? Do I want that to go land in a data warehouse, a data lake, something else? How do I need that to actually look so that I can go do the analytics on the back end? The way that I structure something to be used to build a Power BI dashboard might look different than how I need to structure it to build an AI agent. And I need to understand what are those use cases. That's the downstream work that we're talking about. I need to have a sense of volume of data. There's a big difference in what my need is going to look like if I have a couple thousand records of data versus a couple billion records, which is probably self-evident. But I still need to get and understand that. We talked about how things are loaded and how you might want to think about those things. And then we also want to make sure that we're checking our quality. How do I actually know that when it lands in my storage, that we feel comfortable with the quality of our work as we get there? So I want to go figure out answers to all of those things. And that brings us to that last stage in the process, which is analytics. And we talked about those things a little bit earlier. Analytics is what you're going to do. That's the downstream work that happens after storage. So you might be using a tool like Azure AI Foundry. You might be using a tool like Fabric, both to orchestrate the storage and the analytics. Or we mentioned earlier, you might use a tool like Synapse. And Synapse, just to introduce it, is very similar to Fabric. Both of them are end-to-end solutions that help with data storage and data analytics that handle the extract, transform, and load step. So a question that you might have for yourself is like, what's the actual difference between those? Why would I pick one versus the other to help me with this middle step and ultimately help me get the results that I need for my organization to make data-driven decisions? In a couple minutes, Dharneesh is going to go and give you a bit of a primer and demonstrate differences in how those tools work so you can see it. But it's helpful to do a quick comparison between them as well. Azure Synapse is a phenomenal tool, but it's really built for engineers. So if you have more technical individuals on your team, then this is probably a tool that you might want to gravitate towards. It's going to give you a lot of fine-grained control over what you're doing and really gives you the scale that you need in order to do broader work. Fabric, on the other hand, is much closer to a low or no code tool. You probably still need someone with some technical savvy, more like an analyst to help you with this, but you don't need someone with quite the full technical scope that an engineer would. It gives you a little bit less control, so that's the trade-off. You're kind of more limited to what the system lets you do in the first place. But still, there's a lot of things that you're able to do with it off the bat. It's really helpful in particular for things like business intelligence and building that on your own. And you're going to be able to use some built-in pipelines. In general, the trade-off that you're making overall is productivity versus control. Productivity meaning how quickly to a solution are you going to be? So something like Fabric is going to be really high productivity. You can jump in there quickly and much more quickly iterate upon the solutions that you need. Or on the flip side, something like Synapse, you're giving up some of that productivity for a much higher increase in control. You're going to be able to build the things that you need in the way that you need them to be done. So with that said, like just to wrap up this point around storage and extract, transform, load and how that connects to analytics, I'm going to pass it over to Dharneesh, who hopefully at this point is able to talk. And if not, we can solve for that. And he is going to talk us through a demo of Azure Synapse versus Microsoft Fabric. Dharneesh?
Can you hear me okay, Ryan?
Yeah, you're good. We solved the problem.
Okay.
That's why he's an engineer.
Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Dharneesh, and today I'm going to show you a quick demo on building ETL pipelines using Azure Synapse and Microsoft Fabric. So building on top of the donor scenario we have been using in this webinar, imagine you are a fundraising manager at a nonprofit, and every month you are asked same questions like, how much money did we raise this month? Which campaigns are performing best, and so on. You might run into challenges or pain points similar to what Ryan discussed before, like working with Excel files, like different versions of data, mismatched column names, and so on. So now let's see how these Microsoft tools can help you build like a strong data infrastructure. Firstly, let's talk about Azure Synapse. Azure Synapse, the platform that brings together data warehousing and big data analytics. It allows you to run queries on both structured data, the table format data, and unstructured data as well, without moving between multiple systems and things like that. So let's dive into the demo. For the demo, we have curated a sample data set with 5 files, and it's been stored in a storage account in Azure. So campaigns, donations, donor, all common data files for donations. So now that we have the raw data, we can switch to Azure Synapse Workspace. Yep. Yeah, so this is the Azure Synapse Workspace. First, I would like to show the Knowledge Center. So if you go to the Knowledge Center, they have like predefined templates. So the first one is the database template. Based on your organization type, you have predefined templates. So if you're in banking, airlines, healthcare, they have the predefined database schemas and common templates. Similarly, they have some templates for pipelines as well. So some of the most common things like bulk copy from database and other like if you want to delete files older than 30 days. So all these common use cases have been templatized and it's like readily available in Synapse. So that's like a really cool thing to look into. Now we can switch to the actual Synapse workspace. So the goal of this demo is to take the raw data and then do some transformations and do some cleaning and finally visualize it in Power BI. So I will walk you through the steps. The first step is to connect to the datasets that we have in the storage account. So as you could see, there's like integration datasets. Um, so all the 5 datasets has been integrated. Basically, Synapse connects to the storage account and fetches the files from there. As you could see, there are like a bunch of other link services here. So Azure Synapse offers multiple connectors, so you can bring in data from multiple places. So if you have data in Amazon S3 or Google or somewhere else, there are like predefined connectors which you can use to bring in the raw data. So now we have the raw data all connected. The next step is to uh, do the transformations. So for transformations, they have a couple of options here. Either you can go the notebook route, that is like a full-on coding. So we can write Python. So here I have used a Spark in order to load the data and do some uh, transformations, cleanings, and all those things, and then finally write it back to the storage. And the second option, this is an option I like. So it has like uh, a little bit low code option. So you could easily visualize the steps happening here. It gives you the blocks and then it helps you visualize the flow. So here we have all the uh, sources and in this pipeline, we are doing a couple of joins and then we are creating like a master data set and then we have a final sync. That's like our final master data set. And it also has expression builders, which you can use to create new calculated columns and other things that you would like to do with the cleaning for the data set. So once we have the data clean and ready, um, the other option that Synapse offers is by integration. So it can integrate with other pieces. So if you have an Azure Function app or if you want a data to go somewhere else, so you can connect your pipeline with those. And also you can monitor the pipeline trends. So you can create triggers. So triggers, if you would like to do the data refresh daily, weekly, as Ryan said, based on the frequency you'd like, you can create the triggers and um, do the data refresh and we can monitor the pipelines. So if you have like a monthly triggers, you can see like all the status, if it succeeded every month and what time it took and what are the other logs that you would like to see. So all those can be monitored and tracked in this page. So yeah, that's Synapse. So we can look into the same ETL process in Fabric. Yeah, so for Fabric, we start with the same 5 files. We have the files this time stored in SharePoint, which is much convenient to start with. So the pipeline is kind of similar to the previous one. So we have the SharePoint, and then we use like the data flow in Fabric that does the transformations and ETLs, and the cleaned version is saved in the Lakehouse. Um, and the Lakehouse is exposed to the Power BI. So the Power BI has a semantic model, and we create finally the Power BI reports. So yeah, pretty much similar pipeline. So we can look into the pieces here. So going into the data flow, um, Fabric, it's a little easier. So it offers this Power Query to do the transformations. Power Query is kind of Excel-like, so it's much all Microsoft services uses this Power Query, so it's easier to work with. So it has a sequence of steps, as you could see. You could see the applied steps, so it's all in sequence, and you can see like it navigates to the source, and then it changes some data types and does some more transformation. So it's straightforward and Yeah, once we have the data, we make all the schemas and connections in the semantic model. So we have the clean tables, and as you could see, there is like donors and engagement is connected by donor ID. It's like a one-to-many relations, and all the connections have been made. Um, Once we have the finalized data model, um, we can visualize it in Power BI. Yep. Yeah. Power BI is a great tool for visualization. It helps nonprofits to measure impact, improve operations, and tell stories, data stories clearly. So here we have created a couple of sample reports to just showcase some of the capabilities of Power BI using this test data set we had. The first one is the fundraising overview. We have some KPIs on top, like the total donations, total donors, and uh, things like that. And we have also the year slicer. Yeah. So we can select between years, and we have like total donations by year. So it is like an aggregate of the total donations, and we have the bar chart that is like donations by campaign name. Another cool thing about Power BI is the visuals are interactive with each other. So if you'd like to see just the green energy funds numbers, when you click on it, all the numbers uh, are filtered down to green energy fund in specific, so you can see uh, the numbers for it. So the second page we have here is donor 360. So the table in the left gives like a all the donations by first name, last name, and occupations. And similarly, we have an year and preferred cause slicers. Um, and also we have like a donor retention percentage, and the map is really helps us to visualize the donations by state, so across the US. So yeah, to summarize, I like this analogy. So from Synapse and Fabric. So Synapse is like renting an empty apartment. You get walls, plumbing, electricity, but you need to bring furniture, you need to set up the Wi-Fi and decide how you're organizing your space. But Fabric is like staying in a fully furnished Airbnb. Everything is ready to use. You have kitchen, furniture, TV, everything is already set up. You just move in and start using it. So, um, uh, yeah, Fabric is much easier to use, and Synapse has more control over your data. So, yep, that's all for today's demo. I will pass it back to Ryan.
Great. Thanks so much, Dharneesh. And a couple of quick things I want to highlight. One is I recognize just as we're going through the videos for those tools, it can sometimes be a little bit tough to follow along, but they do guide you through the steps pretty well as you're going through it and can see things. So I just want to call that piece out. And the other thing that I really like about tools like that is we talked a little bit earlier about the idea of being able to audit your data and understand how you go from raw data to whatever your final presentation of your data looks like. And I don't know about you, I've had the challenge before where I opened up someone else's Excel file that they made. And it can be really difficult to have to go click into each cell and try to go look at the cell codes to see the calculation for how they got this specific data point. And that can be really, really challenging and really not auditable. It's very tough for an organization to operate that way sometimes, particularly with all those version issues. So tools like Synapse and Fabric and other tools like them help solve some of those problems. One, by making sure you have that single source of data that you know you can trust, so that versioning issue is solved. And then two, because as you saw during each demo, you can go click in on any one of the steps in the flowcharts that he was demonstrating and see exactly how the data was transformed at that step. So you see the logic about the transformation laid out in front of you. That's a lot easier for someone to go audit, whether that's an internal person or otherwise, so that you feel really comfortable with the outputs and the stories that you're telling. whether that ends up being an internal facing dashboard, like about donors, or something external, like maybe your impact measurements. But that's a really important thing for an organization to think about as you're building out your own data strategy. Now, something that's not really tool-based, but is more a general mindset to think about is how your organization approaches data governance. The way I think about governance is tied to how I think about infrastructure. The infrastructure, which is a lot of what Dharneesh demonstrated, helps to tell the what. What is this? What is the data? All of those types of questions. We then have another layer below that, which is ethics, that tells us why. Why does this data matter? Why are we doing these things? Why are we treating the data in these particular ways? Governance is the bridge that tells us how to do that. It is the practices that allow us to have strong data quality, that allow us to do our work in a really effective way, in a way that is ethical and secure and thoughtful about the communities that we're serving. In general, data governance is a strategic framework and oversight for managing data's availability, usability, integrity, and security within your organization. Like I said, it is all the non-sexy stuff like having strong policies and standards and procedures. But they're so important. They are foundational to making sure that you are being a thoughtful partner to the communities that you serve. They're foundational to making sure that you have strong data to understand what your impact is and make sure that you are making those data-driven decisions. Governance ultimately encompasses a whole bunch of different areas. It's things like making sure that you have data quality metrics and standards so that you know that you are protecting the garbage in, garbage out idea, and you're having really high quality data instead of low quality data. It's making sure that you're regularly auditing and assessing your data, not because of a bad thing, but to make sure that you're being the best possible organization you can. It's making sure that you have data quality plans in place. It's making sure that you have consistent monitoring and reporting. It's making sure that members of your team know what their roles are. It's not just, here's this data set, here's this data system that we have that lives over here. It's, here is this data system, and Jill owns it, and she is responsible for all of it across the board. And it's understanding that data literacy and training is something that applies to every member of your organization. It's going to look different across the board, but without that high quality training, whether you're the person interacting with a client or whether you're the CEO and everywhere in between, everyone has to know their role from a data perspective inside of the organization. It's important for so many different reasons. It helps build trust. It helps increase understanding of where data comes from in the first place. If you're an organization that has to deal with data privacy laws, it's going to make sure that you're in compliance with that. And you even know which laws you have to be in compliance with in the first place. It's going to help you address those data silo issues that we talked about of different departments or different systems not having data that talk to each other. It's going to help make sure that you're not misusing data, that you actually are clear internally about when data should be used and for what purpose. And ultimately, all of those things together are going to allow you to have an easier use of data analytics inside of your organization so that you can make those better decisions. Like I said, governance is ultimately a function of ethics. If you don't have that idea of ethics to support you, then there's really no reason for governance in the first place. I'm not going to talk through all of these because this is not a conversation about ethics, but here's my version of different ethical categories that you might want to think of. Ethics, certainly, it's open-ended. There's a lot of different ways to think about this, but just to highlight a few of these that might be important for your organization. Some of you might be working with individuals, and you need to make sure, or it is ethical to make sure that the data that you are using about those individuals, one, comes with their informed consent, that they know what the data is being used for, and therefore there is limitations in the purposes of it. Just because you've collected the data about them doesn't necessarily mean that you can it's a free-for-all and you can use it for all of the things. That ties to this idea of being a really thoughtful partner from a privacy, security, and confidentiality perspective. Are you making sure that when you are working with individuals' data, that you are treating it with the highest possible security, with the highest possible standards for how you're thinking about privacy and what needs to be true in order for that to be the case. Folks should have access and ownership of the data that is theirs. That means that they should be able to request that it's not used anymore. Even if you don't meet legal minimums for that being the case, depending upon your jurisdiction, that's just something that you should be doing as a good partner overall. Have you thought about fairness, equity, and bias? Have you thought about how to make your data use more transparent and hold yourselves to be more accountable based upon that? Should your data be open, or do you need to protect it? What should that look like? All of these are big questions that your organization should really grapple with. Not every organization has the same set of ethical considerations. This is going to be really tailored to whatever your personal needs are. When I think about governance, there's a series of questions that I think through overall, 7 questions that you as an organization should really grapple with. A couple of them we've talked a bit about already, these first 2. How does data flow through your organization, and how is data stored and collected in your organization? We spent the first part of today talking through those types of ideas, but still, it's something you want to map and really deeply understand. The other questions, though, are thinking about how do you make sure your data is high quality? How do you get a handle on who has access to your data? What are the security protocols in place? Do you have the policies and regulations that you need to impact data? And how are you empowering and educating your employees and volunteers to think about data? I'm going to talk through each one of those, not as in-depth as I would love to just because of limited time, but just something to give you a starting point for how to think about each one of those and the steps and processes that you should be thinking about implementing to go address those. A lot of these are things that you can do without any huge technology investment. In some cases, you do need technology investment, but a lot of this has to do with more policy and procedure and really just being thoughtful about it above and beyond anything else. So let's talk about high quality data. High quality data has a bunch of different dimensions to it. I want it to be accurate data so that I know when I'm looking at a data point, I feel really confident in that this is true and clear of any errors. I want it to be complete. So the less missing data that I have, there are no crucial gaps, the better. Complete might also mean that I'm capturing all of the possibilities. So if I'm working with the geography and I'm clearly missing one key demographic from this, that's a huge blind spot in my data. And it might mean that I'm not actually being really true to the area that I'm serving. There could be some bias in my data that I have to go handle. I want it to be consistent so that over time, the same data point means the same thing. It's always consistent in its meaning. Otherwise, I'm not comparing apples to apples over time. I need it to be timely so that I'm getting it at the cadence that is meaningful for whatever my use case is, that it's updated in the moment. None of these like multi-month gaps, but that means people have lost the context of things. It should be quick and reliable. And reliable means that I can actually use it for decision making. That's really a function of all these other pieces, ultimately. Doing these things helps to reduce this idea of garbage in, garbage out. These can be really simple things, such as just making sure there's validation on the data sets that you have. So when people fill out a form, one small thing, an easy example, I live in Delaware, and if someone's writing their state in on a form and I don't have validation on it, that means that sometimes someone could write out the full name of the state, Delaware. And other times someone might write DE. Or sometimes someone might just be lazy and write Della, or they might misspell the word, or whatever it might be. What are the things that I'm doing at the moment of data generation to reduce the likelihood of those inaccuracies popping up? Am I thinking about the fields and how I want them to be fields that are required or otherwise? And you can think of different examples of that across the board. But putting in that upfront investment into your data systems to make sure you're getting high quality data in the first place has long-term impacts on the trustworthiness of your work. Another important thing that you might think a lot about is data access and ownership. So just as a baseline, having a strong understanding of for each of the data sets that you have as an organization, who can even see it in the first place? Is it right-sized? Too many people? Too few people? You can go in either direction. Sometimes it's best to make sure that your data is accessible by as many people as possible, and that's part of how you can hold yourself accountable for things. Sometimes you want it to be as accessible by only a few people. But an important component of that is having a clear understanding of who the subject matter expert is on that data, a data owner, and then potentially, if your organization's big enough, a data steward and a data custodian. Owners are the people who are really thinking holistically about the data set. They're making sure that you're being thoughtful about how that data set needs to be classified, protected, used, the quality of it. They have end-to-end ownership over what that looks like. That might mean they're owning a specific system as opposed to a data set, but still, they are the person in charge. They might work really closely with the data steward. That's someone who has like a really deep set of understanding about that particular data set, and they're going to help figure out the governance standards for it. And you might have a data custodian, and that's the person who's putting those governance standards in place and implementing the controls for them. In practice, particularly for smaller nonprofits, it's very likely that that's just one person doing all of those functions, and that's totally okay. But the point is, your organization knows this data set is owned by this person, and this is the responsibilities that that person has for this data set. And spelling it out really clearly does really make a big difference for how much we can trust the data that we're working with. You might also be thinking about things like security, which is actually a big component of that data ownership piece. That could mean that you're thinking about legal compliance. Some data sets are protected, and you need to be thoughtful about those things. Any data set that you have needs to maintain trust with the people that are using it, with the communities that you're serving. You want to make sure that you're protecting your own intellectual property. This is the special sauce potentially that makes your organization what it is. And you don't want that leaking into the internet onto some free tool or being hacked so that other people can see it. And similarly, by preventing those things, you're preventing harms for the communities that you're trying to serve. If you're in the US, there are already a bunch of policies and regulations that govern these things that you should be aware of, some of which will apply to you and some of which might not. If you're elsewhere in the world, you have your own set of regulations to think about. And then, of course, there's local level regulations besides that. For example, I mentioned I'm in Delaware. We have a Data Privacy Act here as well, and it's only applicable for certain types of organizations and certain sizes, most of which are overlapping with some of the ones we talked about here. But if you're dealing with health information, you're probably already very aware of that, and you need to be really cognizant of HIPAA. Or if you're dealing with student records, FERPA. If you have child data, COPPA. If you have credit card data from your donor systems, then you might deal with FCRA. And it's very likely that the systems you're working with are already handling those things. But you should have a pretty clear understanding of what those are, and specifically what portions of those could be problematic for you that you need to protect yourself against. Really underpinning all these things is just having a strong understanding of when you might be using personal data or personally identifiable data. Those are really similar concepts. I'd argue that this Venn diagram is actually much closer to just being a single circle, but there are some nuanced differences between them that are worth understanding a bit. Personal data is really just any data about a person, but it isn't all necessarily protected. So for example, if we have a person named John Smith, this might be online identifiers like their IP address or different usernames and things along those lines. It could also be information like if they're a public school teacher, a lot of that information is just posted publicly and it's personal, but it's not necessarily protected. It's not personally identifiable information and something that you need to hold even more securely than that. In contrast, stuff that's just personally identifiable would be like the name John Smith on a list of LinkedIn profiles. You could identify who that person is directly, but that's okay. Or similar, or excuse me, I should not have copied over the public school teacher one twice. The public school teacher info is actually personally identifiable. I'll adjust that before we send this out. Some stuff is an overlap. So for example, it's personally identifiable and personal data if you have like their name and their social security number, or if you have something very identifying about them, like John Smith in the context of a list of patients for an HIV clinic. That's data that you have to protect really handily. And then, of course, there's a lot of other data that just doesn't fit into this Venn diagram. It's neither personal data or personally identifiable data. So that could be things like a person's age, zip code, and ethnicity, or it could be things like the name. There's something wrong with how things got copy and pasted. Let's focus in on a person's age, zip code, and ethnicity. The last thing that I want to talk a little bit about here is how to empower employees. One thing that we're going to talk a bit about in a second is how do you make data more discoverable for the people inside of your organization in a way that's thoughtful? Data catalog can be a really great way to do that. It can be part of the education that your employees need so that they can make decisions with data in a way that's meaningful and thoughtful for you. Data catalogs often act as a front door for your organization's data for internal stakeholders. Or if you've ever used an open data portal for a local state or a country or your municipality, a lot of that has been a movement over the last decade plus. That's another example of a data catalog, but for more public-facing data. All of those can be really helpful to reduce friction in your organization. So some key things that might be included here are things like for each data set, so this is by data set, stuff that you might include. It's the basics, the overall metadata. What's the name of this? What's a description of it? Is there a program it's tied to? What are some common use cases you might use this data for? There is overall governance metadata, so making it easy for the person in your organization to get a clear understanding of, yes, Jill is the person who owns our donor data. How sensitive is this data? Are there any rules about it? Like I can't go put it into Copilot or to ChatGPT, or what are the deals there? What are the retention policies for it? How long are we keeping data tied to this? And are there any legal considerations here? And then to make it easier for people to use, some technical information. Where does this data come from? Did it come from Salesforce before it gets dropped into our overall system? Where does it actually live? How can I find it? How often do I refresh this? Is this the daily or the yearly refresh cadence or something in between? And how did it go from where it lived in its system of record to where it is now? So what's the lineage? And any notes that someone just might want to know about data quality. So like, hey, this particular column has a lot of missing data. You're going to have to deal with that if you're using it. Here's how we have dealt with it before. But it's all this information to make it easier for people to use those things. One tool that we mentioned earlier that can be really helpful for this is a tool called Microsoft Purview. In a second, Matt's going to give you a demo of that and how you can enact something like Microsoft Purview to make data more discoverable across your organization and also just improve governance in a more general way. So I'm going to pass over to Matt, and he's going to go through a quick demo about how that works.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with what Purview is and why does it matter. So Purview is a single place you can use to manage how data is discovered, classified, protected, and monitored across your entire digital environment. You can think of Purview kind of like a smart home system. It monitors your environment, alerts you to any issues, and even locks the doors when something's off. You might have antivirus to identify malicious software, but data governance and sensitivity is just as important, and it can be a real challenge to manage. And this makes this a lot easier. Purview also works across Microsoft 365 and even non-Microsoft platforms, so it's not limited to just one ecosystem. Over the next few minutes, I'll walk through a few different key areas. I'm going to talk about how Purview identifies sensitive data, how it helps you label and protect that data, how it reports on risks, and how it can take action automatically when something risky happens. And so to start this all off, we will take a look at the sensitive info types area. So here we're looking at the building blocks of Purview's ability to recognize and protect your sensitive data. It's kind of like giving Purview a dictionary of sensitive terms so that it knows what to look for in your emails, your documents, and your chats. And you use these types to prevent sensitive data from being shared in the wrong place. Microsoft provides over 300 predefined types like credit card numbers, ABA routing numbers, passport IDs, and much more. And these span global regions. So whether you're working in US Social Security numbers or EU tax IDs, Purview has you covered with everything. You can also create custom types. Like a nonprofit foundation might define a custom type for like donor IDs or maybe a grant reference number, whereas small businesses might want client tax IDs, bank account details, confidential pricing sheets, things of that nature. So the next item that we will take a look at is called the sensitivity labels. Now this is how you decide what protections apply to the sensitive data that Purview finds. I'm gonna scooch me forward just a hair because I talk too fast. Here's my labels. There we go. So the labels are kind of like digital stickers. They tell Purview how to treat a file and email or site. You can kind of think of these like security clearance badges. They define who can access what and what protections are in place. Labels can be applied manually by users, or it can be applied automatically based on the content itself. So you might have labels that users can use when they're drafting specific emails if they know the sensitivity of that content, but you might also design automatic labels to detect that same content in those same emails so that your users don't forget. They can encrypt files automatically, they can add watermarks, they can restrict access to specific users or groups. You have a lot of functionality that you can build into something like this. For this particular demo, we can see a couple different labels here for a fictional company merger. And that's to help protect documents related to the negotiations for that potential merger. Whereas a nonprofit might have like a board only label for strategic planning document or a donor confidential for fundraising data. In short, labels help users make smart decisions without needing to be security experts. So labels are great, but they need to reach your users, and that's where the label policies come in. So label policies publish the labels to all of those Microsoft 365 applications like Outlook, Word, SharePoint, and Teams. If labels are like the security clearance badges, then the policies are the process of deciding which badge goes to which role in your organization. You're not really handing badges out randomly, you're publishing them to the right people in the right places so that they can apply the right protections. You can set priorities like these ones that are related to that merger. Policies can be scoped to specific users or specific groups or specific locations. Some more examples you might see: a nonprofit might publish a volunteer confidential label to HR and program managers only. And maybe a small business might apply a client financials label to something accounting teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint folders so that only accounting teams could have access to that. So once the labels are in place, you want visibility. And so the next thing we're going to look at is the reports that show what Purview is finding and how it goes about protecting those things. So this is the reports, the Data Explorer, and this is kind of like having your security camera for your data. You can see what's happening, you can see where it's happening, and you can take action before it becomes a problem. This report that you're looking at right now shows top sensitive information types that it detected. Like you can see those 67 instances where it found credit card numbers. And you can drill down by data source. You can see that there's Exchange, there's OneDrive, there's SharePoint and Teams. You can even drill down to the specific document or email where the data was found. And this is all based on built-in detection. This isn't like huge custom development that's needed to have this type of functionality that you're looking at right now. So a nonprofit might use this to discover that donor credit card information is being stored in an unprotected Excel file in OneDrive. And maybe a small business might find that employee social security numbers are being emailed out without encryption. So that's all looking at what's going on that has already happened effectively. But we want to look next at adaptive protection, where Purview gets proactive instead of reactive. So adaptive protection uses machine learning to detect risky behavior, and it applies policies automatically. It's like a smart lock that changes its behavior based on who's approaching and what they're doing. It integrates with insider risk management, DLP, and conditional access. If a user's behavior matches a risk profile, Purview can apply stricter DLP rules. It can trigger access restrictions. It can auto-label content with retention policies. So again, if a nonprofit staff member downloads like huge volumes of donor data, Purview could detect that and flag the behavior and apply encryption or even limit access controls. And if a small business employee attempted to share confidential pricing data externally, Purview could block that action and alert IT. So in closing, Microsoft Purview, it's not just a compliance tool, it's used for trust, transparency, and responsible data use. Whether you're a nonprofit stewarding donor trust or a small business protecting customer data, Purview can help you know your data, protect your data, and act on the risks. And the best part is much of this is built in and automated. You don't need a dedicated security team to get started. I'll turn it back over to Ryan. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Matt. So Purview, great tool to start to get an understanding of your data and just a better understanding of your environment overall, so that you can do some of that data governance work in a bit of an easier fashion and just feel more confident in how you're protecting and thinking about the ethics of your work. So we're very close to the end here. I want to just quickly wrap things up for us as we get going. So a few major things just to put it all together. One, we highlighted tools like Fabric and Synapse that can be the connective tissue to enable analytics for your organization. There are plenty of other tools like that you might consider, but figuring out how to invest in those things to make sure that you're being thoughtful about how your data connects with each other and being thoughtful about the analytics that you're doing can be really, really valuable. On that note, being sure and confident in how to manage data storage using cloud-based systems, moving from SharePoint to something more akin to Azure is going to be really helpful for you in thinking about how to remove data silos and how to have a single source of truth for your data and solve some of those other messy problems like automation that we talked about. And last, governance is something that you can start doing today, something you can improve upon today. It's something that you can do to make sure that you're being safe and effective in terms of data usage at your organization. And all of those things combined are the important aspects of what makes a data strategy a data strategy. If you remember, data strategies are a tool that allows you to optimize the resources that you have, particularly when we're in nonprofit environments where being able to optimize resources is just so important. It's a tool to build trust with the communities that you're working with, one, by having strong data, and two, by making sure that you're protecting them. It allows you internally to have improved decision making at all levels of your team, whether that's frontline staff or directors and above, all of whom need to use data so that they can act best in ways to advance the mission of your organization. We highlighted a few great tools at Microsoft that enable this: Fabric, Azure AI Foundry, Synapse, and Purview. But there are so many more that you might consider as well. We also talked about Azure and Power BI. SharePoint is still a really valuable tool that you should be making sure you're leveraging and optimizing. So even if it's not these four particular tools that are right for you in your data maturity today, there are other tools in the technology stack that are going to help you accomplish the overall goals tied to data strategy. With that said, happy to take a few questions. I know we've got about 5 minutes left or so, and then we'll make sure we wrap up by giving you guys some contact info. And of course, I'll reiterate it. You've seen it a bunch of times in chat. There is a survey that you should definitely complete, whether you're here now or need to fill it out later. But happy to take a look at questions. I don't think I saw any in the chat that we didn't get to or in the Q&A. So anyone feel like raising their hand and asking them, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, it looks like that we got to most of them. There was, I think, a general higher level question, and I think Matt might have addressed. But I kind of even spinning off this, if I can, um, to the question that Matt did address about templates.
Yep.
And then just to the direction in general, the progress that's being made to make these solutions. And I've noticed this in about 7 years of doing this, is this moving towards these service functions coming down into digestible bits that our sector, can better utilize, where this is not just pie in the sky thinking. These are things that nonprofits can take advantage of now, and then the direction that it's heading.
I can also add too,
Go
usually when I see those nonprofit specific templates like that, it's because Microsoft has recognized that that particular functionality has been used in this specific way a lot. And so even if that particular template is like only in preview, it means there's a lot of like examples out there that you could pull from. So you're not just trying to reinvent the wheel using this service on your own. When you start poking around out there, you're going to see a lot of people that have used these services for the same stuff that you would probably want to use it for as well. So there are a lot of resources out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Great call, Matt, and definitely agreed there. It's something to look out more and more for better and better use cases, particularly for nonprofits. Any other questions or thoughts? And glad to
I
hear
actually
that
did have something that came in via email too, if there's nothing that
sure.
comes in. So, an attendee that had a drop had emailed me, just again, kind of a high level thing, which is nice. When you're thinking about this, I mean, this is obviously a lot to take in. They were asking, just based on experience, what's a comfortable time frame for adopting like a data strategy and then getting this to scale? Like, they said that they were an 18-person shop. So what, like, I mean, there's no hard or fast rule or thumb, but from the experience of you all, like, what are some good time estimates for constructing a pipeline, like, or just the way that you're going to manage and map data first, and then getting to the higher level functions?
Definitely. I would say this is a like multi-year effort to really think about enacting all of these things. And a lot of that isn't always limited to the technology component of it. It's the change management and getting people onboarded and the training. There's a lot of like, even though this is a very technical topic, it really is a lot about how people work more than anything else. And that's a hard thing to change other than just like writing a Python script or something like that. As an example of one of these, we're wrapping up a project right now with a local housing organization. It's been about a 10-month process for us working with them. And they started off with us. We started with a data audit. I mentioned that earlier. That's a great place for a lot of organizations to start. And the idea there was, let's get a sense of all your data sources and what are the pain points for you there? What are the use cases that you might be looking for? And then from there, it was the implementation of a data warehouse and an analytics backbone, mostly in the form of Power BI dashboards for them. And that's been about 10 months. But for the organization, they started reaching out to go find partners for this about 18 months ago. And there's still more work that they've identified to be done beyond this. And I think that's a pretty typical timeline that you might see. So it's imperfect, Kevin, like you said, but I hope that gives folks a bit of a taste of what that could be. Right. Well, I'm going to just reshare my screen real quick just to give folks a couple of useful resources and email addresses at the end. Kevin, do you want to take this? You want me to take this? I never know on this one.
You know what? I'll let you take this. So you've been on all day, so please take it away.
I've got 1 minute left of it. But anyway, so TechSoup, of course, is a phenomenal partner. You should go take a look at their Digital Skills Center if you're trying to learn more about Microsoft AI and some of their digital skill building. Also, if you have questions for either of our teams, both about Microsoft solutions, you can go to reachus@techsoup.org. Or if you're interested in working with our team, certainly go to training@techimpact.org and let them know what you're interested in. And we're happy to help you overall. We do a lot of work with TechSoup. And so, yes, Joanne, there's ways to work with us through TechSoup or separately as well. But we love working with TechSoup, phenomenal organizations, and we're happy to partner with them. Kevin or any of the rest of the team, anything you'd add on top of that?
I was actually just typing out a response to Joanne. So I don't even know, like, how long have our organizations been working together? At least 12 or 15 years.
Yeah, a long time. It certainly predates me
Yeah.
by a good bit. So
Yeah.
really strong partnership there.
Yeah, we at the end really this is and sharing this content. It's really just, again, the goal is what we're all focused on. Like, data has become the new gold mine. We all know this. We experience this every day. Sometimes good, sometimes a little creepy, but it's the way in which things operate. And having not necessarily a data first, but a data invested nonprofit. I don't care if it's a 5-person food bank, like where near I'm from in Norman, Oklahoma, or whether it's a Feeding America chapter. Thinking about things in terms of like numbers, impact, and then it all trickles down to that development, fundraising, and grant angle that all of us are familiar with. A story, an impact story is great, but when you can move that into numbers, into graphs, and to something visually compelling like the Tech Impact team showed, I've said in many a conferences in the last 3 years where it almost feels as if data is a stronger metric of impact and storytelling than the stories that we're used to. So yeah, I would just part on that note and our focus on making sure that if you have an interest, even a passion about becoming a data-centric nonprofit, that we get you to the right resources, and we are a resource for that, and our partners Tech Impact are as well.
So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. I know we're past the time at this point. I'll reiterate, do the survey. That helps everybody. And you will be getting the slides and the recording from the amazing TechSoup team. Thanks for having us today, and looking forward to being in touch if that's something that you all need. Thanks, everybody.
Take care, all.
Great week, everyone. Bye.